Everyone, there's a few things happening right now that don't seem connected at first, but when you take a step back and you look at them together, they start to point a very specific direction for XRP. On the one side, you have the US state moving towards holding XRP as part of a reserve, and on the other, you have a new infrastructure that allows institutions to actually use XRP in a way that looks a lot more like traditional finance. And later on top of that, you got this rising geopolitical tension that could impact global markets very, very quickly. So individually, these are important, but together, they tell a much bigger story. So hey everyone, it's Caleb here. In this update, I want to walk you through what's happening, how these pieces are connected, and why this moment might be more important than it looks like on the surface. So as always, this is not financial advice, just my perspective and 2 cents. Please always do your own research. You owe that to yourself. Now, starting with the market, XRP is just hanging around that $1.33 tight range that we've been watching for the last month or so, right? Bitcoin's pushed back up a bit, but like beyond the price, there's a macro development right now that deserves real attention because this is the kind of thing that can shift markets very, very quickly. So of course, you have Donald Trump always making moves, and he made a very aggressive statement regarding Iran, setting a deadline for Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And in that message, he warned that if like the Strait of Hormuz isn't opened, that the U.S. could target key infrastructure, referring it to as power plant day or bridge day. So tensions, guys, tensions aren't easing. They're seem to be doubling down. Now that could change. We're gonna have to find out and see what happens. But this is one of the most important oil transit choke points in the world, right? We've been watching it pretty closely, and it's a large portion of global oil supply that moves through this single route. So even the threat of disruption, it still matters, and it's going to continue to matter until this thing's resolved. But what typically happens in this like sort of chain reaction that we've been watching is that energy prices start moving. That feeds into inflation expectations, and from there it impacts global liquidity and overall risk appetite, right? And there's like that's where crypto kind of starts to come into play here, is because assets like XRP don't just move on their own fundamentals by themselves, separated from the markets, right? They're heavily influenced by liquidity conditions, right? Everything's tied together. So when uncertainty rises, volatility tends to increase across the board overall. But at the same time, environments like this can also accelerate interest in alternative financial systems. So especially ones that are faster, global, and less dependent on traditional intermediaries, right? So right now you have two forces building at the same time. You have this rising, on the one hand, you have this rising geopolitical uncertainty. And then you have, on the other hand, continued growth in crypto infrastructure and adoption. So short term, that combines, that combination together, it creates volatility at the end of the day. But long term, it tends to push markets towards reevaluating utility, right? And there's the difference. And for XRP specifically, that matters because its core use case is centered around moving value across borders efficiently, right? So in a world where global systems are under pressure, that's becomes more relevant, not less relevant, right? Now, let me tell you something too. To bring it back to XRP directly, one of the most interesting developments right now that's coming out is actually coming out of Arizona. So there's a bill, Senate Bill 1649. It's advanced, and it includes the creation of a digital asset strategic reserve fund, right? So XRP is explicitly listed as one of the assets that can be held. So this is part of like an active legislative process, but what's important here is that it isn't really even just the bill itself. It's the shift in mindset, right? Instead of automatically, liquidating digital assets, the state's exploring the idea of actually just holding them long term, right? And that's a meaningful change because holding implies value, right? And it implies potential use. It implies these assets are being looked at as part of a broader financial network and framework. And XRP's inclusion is notable because of how it's designed, right? Fast, low cost, and built for movement rather than just storage, right? It's still early, but this is a signal that governments are beginning to take digital assets more seriously in a practical sense, right? And second major development that's coming out these days and it builds directly on top of the idea of practical use, is that Ripple has introduced a treasury management system that integrates digital assets, including XRP, into enterprise financial operations. So what that means in real terms is that like companies can now hold XRP alongside traditional fiat currencies, the traditional money, right? Um, and it view balances in real time. It manages everything within a single system. And that might sound like a small step, but it involves and solves a major problem, right? One of the biggest barriers to adoption has always been fragmentation, right? Different platforms, disconnected systems, and added complexity. But by integrating XRP directly into treasury workflows, that friction starts to disappear. And for CFOs or corporate treasurers, like that's critical, right? Because adoption doesn't just happen because something exists. It happens when it becomes easy to use within the systems that they already trust, right? So if XRP can be treated similarly to cash from an operational standpoint, it becomes a far more viable um, functional asset, right? And that's where utility begins to translate into consistent demand, right? So if you zoom out for a bit to like Bitcoin's moved back up over above like a 69,000, and that supports this environment because when Bitcoin stabilizes or trends higher, it reduces pressure across these markets and allows other assets to kind of respond to their own developments that's going on, right? So right now XRP is sort of in that position. It's relatively stable. It's been holding where it's at, but with multiple underlying catalysts that are building for this big change, right? Like I mean, think of like when I think of XRP too, you got to think of like the global shipping containers, right? They all if all these ports had infrastructure built for different types of shipping containers, it would be an absolute nightmare to try to like offload and onload these ships, right? But no, they made a standardized system for all of these containers that they just all use the same containers and all use the same like what do you call it, infrastructure really, but means of taking these things on and off, right? And that's what they're trying to do with this financial system. They're trying to get everybody to use the same type of stuff so that it makes it a lot faster and more efficient, because that way you don't have to like have all this different types of infrastructure to do the same thing that everybody wants to be done, right? So if everyone can get on the same board, then hey, now we're talking. Now we're talking that things can actually start moving effectively and efficiently, and that's really what the XRPL Ripple is doing, right? Globally. So people are starting to get on board, and that's gonna and the people that don't jump on board are gonna be left in the dust, right? So everyone seems to be starting to get involved. And another piece that continues to build in the background during all this is like the tokenized real world assets, right? Like this market's grown to be around $27.6 billion, they say, right? So like even during a mixed period of crypto overall, that consistency suggests institutions are continuing to move forward regardless of short-term volatility. And this directs back to XRP's original role as that bridge asset, right? It's designed to move value efficiently between systems. So, as more assets become tokenized, the need for a reliable settlement infrastructure increases, and that's exactly where XRP fits, right? So there's a timing, of course, to this element that's worth noting, but historically, April's been one of XRP's stronger months in terms of average returns. So on its own, that doesn't guarantee anything, but when you combine that with the improving sentiment, growing infrastructure, early signs of broader adoption, it adds another layer to this overall setup that we've been looking for. And so if we're looking at XRP more closely, yes, we're in that $1.30 to 35 range. Like, sure, could we see a key level if it goes above $1.45 and where we can get like a breakout confirmed? Hey, I don't know. Let's watch and see. That would be nice. Or if we start to lose that $1.30 range, we might be headed for a buck before we start to see some real flows coming in. And that wouldn't be a terrible thing, honestly, because it's opportunity to get at this stuff, because eventually in my personal opinion, this thing is going to be worth a lot This thing is going to be worth so much in the future, especially having all financial, like it has the ability to have all financial rails running on it, right? So if that happens, you're not just looking at like a $10 XRP. You're looking at like $1,000+ XRP, and that means every 1,000 XRP you have is worth $1 million. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but this is very possible, guys. This is very possible. So the fundamentals are improving. Early stage government engagement through the Arizona bill. That's the start, right? Institutional integration through Ripple's treasury system. Hello, right? Individually, yeah, these aren't moving price right now, but together they contribute to something more sustainable, real usage. And when that continues to build, which it is, steady pace, then yeah, we're moving towards some of those higher price targets, in my opinion. And that's a reasonable scenario based on this utility and not just speculation, right? It's not just, yeah, we're speculating that it's going to go to those prices, but it's also based off of something. It's not just a gamble. We're not just throwing things into roulette and seeing where it's going to go. No, like the speculation is based off of actual utility, right? So, we take a step back. The bigger theme here, it really is integration. And it's not just an XRP as a concept, but it's XRP being positioned within the actual financial system, and both the institutional and potentially government level, right? So those shifts, yeah, they're not going to show up immediately, but they're showing up. They're certainly showing up. So I'm curious to see, what you guys think and how this is going to play out. What's your outlook for XRP going into 2026? Drop your thoughts in your comments below. I do go through them. And if you want consistent, no fluff updates on XRP, the broader crypto space, you can subscribe and throw a like in the comment if you're finding a like on the page if you're finding value here. I want to keep updating you guys every single day. But, for now, I want you guys to stay blessed, be positive, and I'm going to catch you guys in the next one.